You know, I usually stay out of these conversations, but with Caitlin Clark, I can't stay silent anymore.
I'm sick of watching Caitlin getting attacked. If the league doesn't
What happens when the biggest young star in women's basketball keeps finding herself at the center of controversy, physical play, and non-stop debate? What happens when fans start asking whether the league is protecting competition, or protecting chaos? And what if a basketball icon from a different era looked at all of it and saw something deeply familiar? That is why this conversation has become so explosive. Because when people watch Caitlin Clark, they are not just watching a rookie, a scorer, or a headline maker. They are watching a player who has instantly become one of the central figures in the sport. Every possession feels bigger. Every hard foul becomes a national talking point. Every confrontation turns into a referendum on the future of the WNBA. So let me ask you something before we go any further. Have you ever seen a young superstar draw this much attention, this much pressure, and this much physical resistance this early in a professional career? Have you ever seen a player arrive with this much hype and immediately become the focal point of not just defensive schemes, but emotional reactions from an entire league? That is why this story has captured so much attention. For many fans, the situation brings back memories of another era, when great players were tested not only by skill, but by force, intimidation, and relentless physicality. And whenever that comparison comes up, one name always enters the conversation: Michael Jordan. Jordan understood better than almost anyone what it meant to be targeted. In the 1980s and early 1990s, he walked into a league stacked with elite defenders, veteran enforcers, and teams that believed the best way to slow down brilliance was to make every minute miserable. They bumped him, grabbed him, hit him, and challenged him physically because they knew matching his talent straight up was nearly impossible. That is what makes the Caitlin Clark conversation so intense. Because to many observers, there is a difference between hard basketball and unnecessary basketball. There is a difference between tough defense and cheap contact. There is a difference between trying to win a possession and trying to send a message that has nothing to do with the play itself. And that is where Alyssa Thomas became part of a much larger debate. For some viewers, what happened was not simply another hard moment in a physical game. It became symbolic. It became one more example in a growing pattern that fans believe shows Clark being treated less like a rookie learning the league and more like a target carrying the full emotional weight of the attention around her. That is why emotions exploded. Because when a player is already dealing with contact, pressure, media scrutiny, crowd expectations, and the burden of representing a new era for the sport, every additional incident starts to feel bigger than itself. Fans stop asking what happened on one possession. They start asking what kind of environment is being created around the league's most visible star. And that is where the Jordan comparison gets really interesting. Jordan came from a brutal era, maybe the most brutal era the NBA had ever seen. But the mythology of that time was never just about physical punishment. It was also about confrontation in the open. It was about testing greatness head-on. It was about making a superstar prove it in front of everyone, not taking advantage of moments when a player was vulnerable or unaware. That distinction matters. Because many basketball fans can accept intense rivalries. They can accept elbows, hard screens, physical drives, body blows in the paint, and heated exchanges between competitors. But what they struggle to accept is the feeling that certain actions cross from competition into something smaller, something more desperate, something that feels less like elite basketball and more like frustration disguised as toughness. And once that perception takes hold, reputations begin to change. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer just about who won the game. It is about who represented the game the right way. It is about who looked composed under pressure and who looked rattled by the spotlight. It is about who elevated the league and who contributed to the noise around it. That is why this moment hit so hard. Because Clark's rise has already changed the scale of attention around women's basketball. She brings cameras. She brings headlines. She brings sellout crowds, endless debate, and a flood of new viewers who may be watching the WNBA seriously for the very first time. And when those new viewers tune in, what they see matters. They want intensity, yes. They want real competition, yes. But they also want a version of the sport that celebrates greatness instead of resenting it. That is the heart of this debate. Not whether basketball should be physical. It should be. Not whether stars should be challenged. Of course they should. The real question is whether the challenge is rooted in basketball excellence, or whether it comes from something else entirely: frustration, resentment, insecurity, or the fear that the game is changing in front of everyone's eyes. And that is what makes the entire Alyssa Thomas discussion so combustible. Because once people believe a player crossed that line, they stop seeing the act as competitive fire. they start seeing it as a revealing moment. A moment that tells them something about mindset, discipline, and the ability, or inability, to handle a rising superstar the right way. That is why this is not just a story about one incident. It is a story about standards. Standards for veterans. Standards for stars. Standards for how the league wants to look in one of the most important moments in its growth. And standards for how greatness should be met when it arrives wearing a target on its back.
When you watch this playback, you can see even before that, Alyssa Thomas knees Caitlin Clark in the groin, then puts her fist into Kit Clark's...
The reason this conversation has grown so quickly is simple. Fans did not just react to contact. They reacted to context. They saw a player already dealing with a chaotic moment, already under pressure, already absorbing the kind of attention that follows every move Caitlin Clark makes. And in that moment, many viewers did not interpret what happened as routine physical play. They interpreted it as a push too far, the kind of act that instantly shifts public opinion because it feels unnecessary, avoidable, and revealing. And when a moment feels revealing, people begin comparing it to the standards of the game's greatest competitors. That is why so many fans brought Michael Jordan into the discussion. Not because he literally needed to issue a statement for the point to land, but because his career symbolizes a code. Jordan knew what real pressure looked like. He knew what it meant to get hit, to get crowded, to get hunted every night by defenders who wanted to make him uncomfortable. But the respect people still have for that era comes from the belief that the fight, however brutal, was still supposed to live inside the logic of basketball. Before we go any further, if you enjoy smart basketball breakdowns like this, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next conversation. Now let's get back to the story. The core issue here is not whether Clark should expect physical defense. She absolutely should. Great players invite pressure. Great scorers get bumped. Great playmakers get trapped, crowded, and forced into difficult decisions. That is normal. That is professional basketball. That is what happens when the entire scouting report begins with your name. But many fans believe this situation was different. They believe there is a line between competing with intensity and taking advantage of vulnerability. There is a line between making a star uncomfortable and making the game look reckless. And once that line appears to be crossed, the public stops praising toughness and starts questioning judgment. That is where Alyssa Thomas took the biggest reputational hit. Because in the eyes of many viewers, the problem was not just the contact itself. It was what the contact seemed to communicate. It seemed to say that dealing with Clark straight up was not enough. It seemed to say that frustration had started to replace discipline. And when a player is already one of the most discussed names in the league, moments like that do not disappear. They get replayed. They get dissected. They get attached to your name. Then the reaction becomes part of the story too. One of the fastest ways to make public backlash worse is to appear dismissive when fans believe accountability is required. Right or wrong, people want some acknowledgement when a moment looks bad. They want to hear reflection. They want to hear control. They want to hear that a competitor understands how the play was perceived and why it created outrage. When that does not happen, criticism only gets louder. And that is why so many people began framing this through a much bigger lens. To them, this was no longer about one shove, one possession, or one emotional moment in a heated game. It became a symbol of how some players respond to Clark's presence altogether. Because Clark represents more than production. She represents attention. She represents change. She represents a version of basketball that is expanding the audience in real time. Her shooting range, her pace, her vision, her confidence, and her ability to create moments from almost nothing have made her one of the most magnetic players in the sport. Whether people love the hype or resent it, nobody can deny its scale. And that is exactly why every reaction around her feels amplified. When Clark succeeds, people celebrate it like a turning point. When she struggles, people analyze it like a crisis. When she gets hit, fans do not just see contact. They see a test. They see a statement. They see the league wrestling with what to do when its brightest spotlight lands on one player and refuses to move. If you look at it from that angle, the broader concern becomes obvious. What message does the league send if moments like this are allowed to define the viewing experience? What message does it send to young fans watching at home? What message does it send to new audiences who are trying to understand what this era of the WNBA stands for? The league wants passion. It wants rivalries. It wants authenticity. It wants players who care enough to fight for every inch. But it also has to protect the difference between meaningful physical competition and the kind of ugliness that can drag the conversation away from basketball itself. Because once controversy becomes the main attraction, everyone loses. The stars lose because their talent gets overshadowed. The veterans lose because their legitimate accomplishments get buried under debates about intent and image. The fans lose because every game becomes an argument instead of a showcase. And the league loses because the product starts looking unstable at the exact moment it should be presenting its strongest possible identity. That is what makes Caitlin Clark such a fascinating figure in all of this. She is not just surviving pressure. She is performing through it. She keeps showing up. She keeps making reads, making shots, creating plays, and carrying expectations that would overwhelm most athletes, let alone a player still adjusting to the professional game. That resilience is a major reason so many fans remain firmly in her corner. And if you apply that old Jordan lens again, that is where the story turns. Because historically, great players do not simply endure pressure. They absorb it, learn from it, and use it as fuel. Every hard foul becomes motivation. Every slight becomes memory. Every attempt to intimidate becomes part of the foundation they build their greatness on. That is what made Jordan terrifying. And that is what many supporters believe may ultimately make Clark even stronger. Not because the treatment is fair. Not because the controversy is helpful. But because true stars often become more dangerous once they understand exactly how much resistance their presence creates. That is why this debate matters beyond Alyssa Thomas. It matters because it is really about the future of women's basketball. It is about whether the league can balance edge with professionalism. It is about whether competitors can rise to the occasion without letting emotion turn into recklessness. It is about whether the biggest names will be challenged by skill first and physical chaos second. And it is about perception. Right now, millions of new viewers are evaluating the WNBA in real time. Arenas are fuller. Ratings are stronger. Social media is louder. The spotlight is brighter than ever. That means every controversial sequence travels farther, lasts longer, and shapes the league's identity more than it might have in past years. So yes, every game Clark plays now feels larger than itself. Every closeout will be examined. Every foul will be replayed. Every exchange will be interpreted through a bigger narrative about fame, resentment, protection, and what the sport wants to become. That is the reality of this moment, and no player is more central to it than Caitlin Clark. At the same time, this is also a test for veterans across the league. Can they compete with maximum intensity while still showing the discipline that defines great professionals? Can they challenge the new face of attention without letting frustration write the story for them? Can they prove that elite women's basketball is powerful, emotional, physical, and still fundamentally rooted in basketball excellence? Those questions are not going away anytime soon. And neither is the debate over what should happen next. Should officials be quicker to set the tone? Should the league be firmer when incidents appear to cross the line? Should fans relax and accept this as part of what happens when a major star enters a fiercely competitive environment? Or does the current moment demand stronger guardrails to protect both players and the image of the sport? Reasonable people will answer those questions differently. Some will say this is simply what greatness looks like when it arrives early and loudly. Some will say Clark must endure the initiation every superstar faces. Others will argue that the league has a responsibility to recognize when the attention around a star is creating dangerous incentives for opponents who know any confrontation can become a headline. But whatever side you fall on, one fact is impossible to ignore: this story is no longer about a single play. It is about standards, image, leadership, and the direction of the league in one of the most important growth periods it has ever experienced. It is about how stars are treated, how rivals respond, and how the sport defines toughness in front of a rapidly expanding audience. And now the biggest question comes to you. Do you think the current atmosphere around Caitlin Clark reflects healthy competitive basketball, or do you think the league is allowing too many moments to drift into unnecessary controversy? Do you believe Alyssa Thomas was simply playing with emotion in a hard-fought game, or do you think that moment crossed a line that should not be defended? And most importantly, do you think the WNBA is doing enough to protect its players while still preserving the intensity that makes the game compelling? I really want to hear what you think, so drop your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth basketball analysis that goes beyond the surface-level noise, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay locked in for more conversations like this. We are going to keep tracking the biggest WNBA stories, the most talked-about players, and the moments that could shape the future of the sport. Because that is what this is really about now. Not just one foul. Not just one controversy. Not just one player versus another. This is about the next chapter of basketball history being written in real time. It is about pressure, perception, talent, standards, and the responsibility that comes with carrying a league into a bigger spotlight. Caitlin Clark will keep being watched. Alyssa Thomas will keep being discussed. The WNBA will keep being judged by how it handles moments like this. And fans will keep debating where hard competition ends and damaging optics begin. That conversation is not slowing down anytime soon. So share your thoughts below, join the debate respectfully, and let me know where you stand on the future of this league and the way its brightest stars are being treated. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.